Well, hi there, ladies and gentlemen. It's Jordan Bateman from the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association back again for another Facebook Live. And this time I'm joined by Kwantlen Polytechnic University political science professor, man about town, snappy hat wearer, Dr. Shinder Purewal. Shinder, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for coming in. Shinder's been catching me up on all my Indian politics, which is good. You're headed back to India for a visit here shortly.
Yeah, this is my annual trip. I do most of my research in South Asia, and lately it's been focusing on elections and campaigns.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'll tout your book here really quick, Tandoori Democracy. It's available on Amazon. I learned more about Surrey politics through this book about an Indian election than I have in 25 years of living next door to Surrey. It explains a lot of the tactics that are used, a lot of the cultural implications, a lot of things that go into making the South Asian community in Surrey such a potent political force.
Yes, India is the largest democracy in terms of numbers, and it's been the most stable democracy among the developing world. So there are numerous elections going on all the time, from provincial levels, municipal levels, to the federal level, and there are by-elections going on all the time somewhere. So whenever I go, I can watch actual campaigns, and some of them are very similar to what we see in some of the cities in Toronto area or BC. It's a replica of those elections.
Yeah, in the book, I'm amazed at the access you're given to these campaigns. The behind-the-scenes knowledge that you're given, meetings that clearly were just a few people, and somehow you're in the room. And
yes, it's the advantage that a Canadian has, I think. You're a political science professor. You can go and work with the candidates. You can travel with them. They're very nice. They can take you along their campaigns, and they make you sit in their meetings to observe. And I've done that. I've been very thankful to them. I've been part of the journalists who were covering this, and certainly the masses who actually vote during election times.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if we're talking Indian politics in a Canadian context, I guess we have to start with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, his beautiful family. They go on a 9 or 10-day trip to India. By the end of it, the Conservatives were brainstorming ways to try to keep them in India because the bad press coming out of there was so good for them. What's your perspective on that trip? Are we seeing, is the coverage of this trip in some of the South Asian media, is it similar to what we're seeing on places like CBC and CTV and Global?
In fact, yes, one of the major TV networks in India, because India has free press and much more free press than Canada, basically.
Yeah.
They'll get you somehow. So many channels, so many papers, and India has the third largest English dailies on this planet after the US and UK.
Wow.
So English press, vernacular press, and in unanimous opinion, they thought this was one of the worst official visit by any prime minister of any country to India. So that's quite an achievement.
Canada is back, baby.
I don't fault Mr. Trudeau. He probably had his art. He likes people of different ethnic groups. He likes to dress like them, but then it becomes too much when you try to mimic others.
Yes, the dancing, you didn't like the dancing?
He is a pretty good dancer, I could tell you, better than me. So 8 days of official trip, and your official function, the government business is only 4 hours out of it. You don't need to be a political scientist to say it's going to be bizarre.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even the official business, the billion-dollar trade deal, which he made sound like $1 billion was going to flow into Canada. Turns out actually Canada's going to lose $750 million on that deal.
Yeah, even that's not really clear, where the investment is coming. These are sort of feel-good type of announcements. We have very meager trade, $8 billion. Now look at Canada. Canada is an energy giant. Yeah. We are huge. If there is a superpower in terms of energy, Canada is that power. We have so many natural resources. India is the fastest growing developing economy in this world. China and India are sort of grasping any energy sources they can.
Yeah.
And on a small note, India is the largest consumer of lentils.
Lentils.
Our vegetarian diet. And Canada is the largest exporters of lentils to India. Saskatchewan basically produces this.
Wow.
So not many people know about this.
No.
This is one simple fact. So I don't see any reason why the trade between Canada and India shouldn't be 100 billion or 80 billion or 180 billion dollars. But that was not the agenda. Agenda was different.
Yeah.
If you want trade talks, they happen before the Prime Minister arrives, before the cabinet arrives. These are the photo op opportunities.
Yeah.
You know, you sign the agreements, you commit that we'll buy this from Canada, we'll have this much investment from Canada. The Canadian companies would like to go and invest in that fastest developing country. But that is if your objective is simply trade and mutual understanding on we are both democracies, we were part of the Commonwealth.
Yep.
They understand the language, they speak English, the rule of law. And given our participation in NATO and against Taliban, against ISIS, we understand that terrorism is a major threat to the security of developing countries as well as developed countries, to democracies. It's a challenge to democracies today. So you had to.
There was a lot there that could have been discussed.
So if you want to find two natural allies on everything from politics to trade, India and Canada are one of those. They could be as close as the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah. And yet now we've soured this relationship. We have the Indian government actually issuing press releases correcting false statements in
I think the
question period in Canada.
The worst thing was a mistake taking Jaspal Atwal, you know, accused and actually convicted terrorist. And the Indian concern that there were terrorist groups operating in Canada. One of the largest terrorist crimes was in 1985, Air India bombing. 329 Canadians died. So they obviously had those sensitive issues. So you take this person without vetting process. It's sad enough.
Yeah.
Okay? You don't need any vetting process on it. You simply could Google his name and it will pop up. But that's bad enough. The worst part was when you start saying it's Indian government's plan, it's conspiracy. He was planted there. So somehow Indian government asked one of the MPs to invite him and then asked CSES and our RCMP not to vet him. So how much control does Indian government have over Canada? It's mind-boggling.
Yes.
So I think Indian government was more upset at this theory than actual inclusion of Jaspal Atwal.
Yeah, that makes sense. And now, kind of flowing out of that, there's a renewed scrutiny on Canadian elected officials, and we see that Jagmeet Singh, a number of his activities before he became leader of the NDP, they're under a lot of heat, a lot of scrutiny. Terry Milewski apparently called this back in that infamous first interview where Milewski was derided as basically a racist by some NDP supporters for daring to ask Mr. Singh about these tough issues. Turns out he may have been operating under some pretty good information.
He certainly did. Jagmeet Singh's fame to politics came with his association with the secessionist Sikhs. He's been attending their rallies. He's been attending their seminars.
And it's a small group, you were telling me, compared to the overall Sikh population.
My liberal estimate is 5% of the community. But the kind of media coverage they get, it's lion's share. And I must admire their political communication. I mean, they're getting
good.
huge, out of proportion coverage. But certainly they're organized group. They control certain temples. So if you control organizations in temples, it gives you two people, volunteers and funds.
Right.
And in politics, they say money is mother's campaign, mother's milk campaign. So and volunteers. So He won his nominations initially because of this, and then eventually leadership. Most of his votes came from Surrey and Brampton,
Right.
Two cities, and the campaigns were run from Sikh temples.
Yeah.
So now he's trying to disassociate. And secondly, the bigger aspect was any Canadian leader of any party, regardless of your status there, you are expected to denounce terrorism at least on Canadian soil.
Yes.
So
This is a low bar to get over for political leaders. Like, you know, if something terrorist activity happens in Canada, you're supposed to denounce it. I think we all agree.
it's a minimum, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's right.
I would say. Biggest terrorist crime, and a major inquiry, Royal Commission, Justice Major Report. He thought the architect of this terrorist act was Talvinder Singh Parmar, the man who was eventually killed by the Indian forces when he crossed over from Pakistan.
Right.
So Terry Molesky asked Jagmeet Singh a very pointed question. They still play his portraits and call him martyr, and you go and attend those temples and those meetings. He could not denounce that.
Yeah.
So if you're not disassociating with these kind of elements,
A clear terrorist.
a clear terrorist, I mean, what more than a Royal Commission Justice of the Supreme Court labeling him as such?
Yeah.
And the Canadian leaders, nobody can deny that.
Right.
But he faltered on that side. Since then, he's been sort of trying to disassociate, but the NDP probably now thinks they have made a mistake.
Yeah.
They should have done, just like PMO should have done some scrutiny on Jaspal Atwal. They should have looked into his background and also his actions afterwards.
Yeah. Do you think he survives this politically, or is this a fatal?
If you have a leader who is being haunted by video after video coming out, or event after event, relating that person to terrorist organizations, terrorism, or terrorist individuals, it's not a good thing to carry into an election year.
That's not a good election strategy, to be linked to terrorism. Gotcha. I'm going to write this down.
Unless you were running for a parliament in ISIS-controlled territory.
Exactly.
But Canadian people are pretty peace-living, loving, and tens of thousands of our sons and daughters died in fighting against these kind of forces during World War II and afterwards in peacekeeping missions.
Yeah. And I think people like Ujjal Dosanjh, former Premier British Columbia, I think they're not going to go quietly on this. They're going to talk loudly and clearly and try to explain.
He was almost killed by these elements.
Yeah.
And a visiting minister from India, he was visiting Canada. I think there was some wedding in his family. He was shot at. There was an assassination attempt. Editor of a newspaper who spoke against them was killed. So these kind of terrorist activities are not normal in a democracy.
Right.
They have to be recognized, and Canadian authorities should not be associating the at least minimum parties, not associating with these elements. Our parliament, our executive, it's their duty to actually combat these forces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, shifting gears a little bit. I want to pick your brain on, this is a big shift from terrorism to where we're headed next. But, you know, obviously at ICBA we talk a lot about the growing tax and regulatory burden on small businesses. About 90% of the members of ICBA are businesses with, you know, fewer than 10 employees. So when you see things like a payroll tax replacing MSP come in, you know, that's a big concern to our members and one that we're trying to express to the government. What's your perspective on that payroll tax? And you know, what's the perspective? One of the things I admire most about the South Asian community is they are passionate entrepreneurs. They believe in starting businesses. You know, it's a cultural thing that is amazing. You know, they get a lot of press for being democratically involved. Just the passion for entrepreneurism is something that I really respect from that community. Tell me a little bit about how they're reacting to all of this red tape and these taxes and what it might mean for them.
Certainly, I mean, as newcomers to the new country, you have to work hard more than more than my kids would, because they're born and raised in Canada. Because I can write them checks. When I came, I had no father to give
There's
me
no
those
safety
checks.
net. Yeah.
So they work hard, so they expect certain reward for this, that they should keep hard-earned money in their pockets.
Yeah.
As far as the medical services plan was concerned, it was odd in a country that has National Health Act saying it should be universal, it should be free.
Yeah.
It should be accessible to all Canadians.
And it should be $150 a month, apparently.
So BC
Yeah.
was really odd with the national goals, objectives of the healthcare. It's good to give healthcare really free of charge to all Canadians. But my concern, first of all, is we have about 300,000 foreign students and foreign workers who are also getting this free healthcare system.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the Canadians, the British Columbians, they actually pay taxes. They have paid taxes. Their forefathers have paid taxes to build these institutions. And if our school boards, our hospitals, our entrepreneurs are going to be burdened with a new tax, and others are getting a free ride, it's going to raise some questions.
300,000, that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people in a province of 4.5 million people. So it's a huge number.
And one that the community is acutely aware of, I think.
But I also have to get something out of my chest. My community, it's a hugely soccer fan.
Yes. All right, here we go. World Cup time. Let's talk about it.
I was a soccer player myself. My three daughters played soccer all their time. And we were so disappointed with the decision. There are governments that go extra mile to help their cities to. This is an event which is mostly watched. More than 1 billion people will watch the game. They'll know Vancouver. And just imagine the amount of money that will come to Vancouver. We had Expo, we had Winter Olympics, but nothing is more like a soccer World Cup. If a government cannot think beyond a few $1 million, they can tax you to death, but they will not use those taxes to attract world's attention to this city.
Exactly.
Just imagine the, I'm not an economist to tell you, but I can tell you we would have gained billions by that World Cup. But we have lost because of very narrow vision of this government.
No, you're exactly right. And, the NDP opposed Expo 86. The NDP opposed the 2010 Olympics. Now I guess they've gone for the hat trick, opposing the World Cup. And the amazing thing is, we weren't being asked to sign a check today. This was, predicated on getting the bid. There's still negotiations that could have gone on. Why would we say no at this point? Let's get to yes. Let's say yes, and we can negotiate out the rest as we go. It's only 3 or 4 games. We're not talking about having to build a new stadium. You're not talking about billions of dollars of investment. You have the stadium. You got to change it to grass. You'll have to spruce it up a bit. Yeah, okay, we all understand that. Security for 3 or 4 games is not, it's not like what we saw with the 2010 Olympics. 3 weeks of high, heavy security. ICBA, we were dumbfounded by it. ICBA is one of the things that our former president Phil Hochstein was really proud of was during the 2010 Olympic plebiscite. So Vancouver voted on whether they wanted to host the games. Our members lit up every crane in the city with 2010 yes signs. And it was one of those things that it was our contribution. We wanted to build different things, different venues as part of the games. The construction industry wanted to get behind it. That's how they showed it. We don't even get the chance now to try to support the World Cup.
Well, the lucky part for British Columbians were in 1986, the NDP was not in power. When we had Winter Olympics, the NDP was not in power. Now we had the potential of getting a World Cup soccer game. Unfortunately, NDP is in power. And in my community, I can tell you, I've been getting a lot of phone calls from youngsters. Almost every young person I know from our families, extended families, they play soccer. And they're so disappointed. The kids were so disappointed. They finally had chance to see the world soccer players in their own city. And NDP killed it.
And even if it hadn't been, there's talk, you wouldn't get the marquee matchups. Look, even if it's, an African nation versus an Asian nation, people would have come. People would have come here, and just to check it off your bucket list, I went to a World Cup of soccer. that's a big deal for
Well, the teams
billions of people around the world.
teams that show up for World Cup, these are world stars.
Yeah.
They're huge stars.
Yeah.
They may not be playing with the Real Madrid or Manchester United, but most of them probably play for some sort of European or Latin American leagues. Yeah. And our kids, our next generation, would love to see them in our own city.
Yeah.
But so I had to get this out
Yes,
of my
no, I
chest.
appreciate that. I'm glad we talked about it. Driving home yesterday, it was amazing to hear. I was flipping back and forth between the sports station and the news station. So TSN 1040 and Sportsnet 650 and CKNW. On CKNW, all the political people, John Horgan made the wise choice by not going along with this. The sports stations, people were calling in and saying, hey, I'm a first-time caller, never called about anything before. This is the stupidest decision I've ever heard. Heard from a guy who'd been to 6 World Cups around the world, dreaming, the day that one would be in Canada that he could go to and invite some of the people he's met from around the world to see it. Doesn't get that opportunity. It's amazing because I think the political chattering class has one view that Horgan can do no wrong. The sports class, the working class has a completely different view, which is this is a real missed opportunity.
I think if they were to have a real poll, I tell you, majority of the British Columbians would be disappointed with this decision.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they are a silent majority. They don't say much.
Yeah.
They are not on social media much. They're not really callers. But I live among those working families.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of those working families. I can tell you it was a huge, huge disappointment.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the case.